The wolf was dying. So was she. One blanket between them. Evangeline chose him. Stupid. She was a fugitive with a bounty on her head. Saving strangers was suicide. But when those alpha gold eyes opened and she realized she'd just bandaged the Alpha King, stupidity became survival. Magnus Shadowfang was testing his pack in disguise. And she'd either passed or triggered her own execution. If you can't stand leaders who let their people suffer while they sit in comfort, hit that subscribe button right now. Only cowards and corrupt officials won't. Let's stand together against the broken system. The wound wasn't healing. Magnus Shadowfang lay in the snow-covered forest, his wolf form trembling with pain that had nothing to do with the gash across his ribs. He'd inflicted it himself, carefully, precisely, deep enough to bleed but not to kill. A test. Everything was always a test now. For 3 months, he'd received letters. Anonymous. Detailed. Damning. They spoke of Omega's worked to death in the pack's outer territories. Of families torn apart when they couldn't pay taxes that kept mysteriously increasing. Of young wolves who questioned the Beta Council simply disappearing into the night, never to be heard from again. At first, Magnus had dismissed them as lies. His Beta Council was led by Thornwick Vane, a man his father had trusted for 30 years. Thornwick had taught Magnus everything he knew about ruling. About pack law. About the delicate balance between strength and mercy. But the letters kept coming. And the details were too specific. Too accurate. So Magnus had done what any good king would do, he'd gone to Thornwick directly. Malcontents and troublemakers, Thornwick had said smoothly, his silver beard gleaming in the firelight. They resent the structure that keeps our pack strong. These accusations are fabrications designed to undermine your authority, your majesty. Magnus had wanted to believe him. God, how he'd wanted to believe. But 3 nights ago, he'd overheard Thornwick speaking with another council member in the castle courtyard. They'd thought they were alone. They'd been wrong. The Omega quotas are behind this month, Thornwick had growled. Increase the work hours. If any of them complain, remind them about the pack protection tax they still owe. Make sure they understand what happens to wolves who don't contribute. And if they can't pay, the other council member had asked nervously. Then they work it off. The mines always need more laborers. No one asks questions about the Omegas who go down there. Magnus had frozen in the shadows, his wolf raging inside him. The mines. The pack's silver mines were supposed to be staffed by volunteers, paid workers who extracted the precious metal that funded the pack's defenses. But Thornwick had just admitted they were using slaves. That's when Magnus had made his decision. He would see the truth for himself. Not as a king. Not as an alpha. But as one of the broken, desperate wolves his Beta Council was apparently crushing beneath their boots. He'd shifted into his wolf form, used his claws to tear a gash across his own ribs, and stumbled into the forest at the edge of pack territory. The poorest section. The place where Omegas lived in crumbling cabins and struggled to survive. If anyone would help a wounded stranger, it would be here. And if no one helped, well, that would tell him everything he needed to know about what his kingdom had become. Magnus had been lying in the snow for 20 minutes when he heard footsteps. Oh gods, a female voice whispered. Oh no, no, no. Soft hands touched his fur. Magnus forced himself to stay still, to keep his breathing shallow and pained. Through half-closed eyes, he watched a young woman kneel beside him. She was tiny. Malnourished, probably. Her dark skin was ashy from cold and lack of proper nutrition. Her clothes, if you could call them that, were little more than rags held together with careful stitching. No coat. No gloves. Just a thin dress and a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. But her eyes, gods, her eyes were stunning. Deep brown, almost black, filled with a compassion that made Magnus' chest ache even through the test he was conducting. You're hurt so badly, she murmured, examining his wound. Who did this to you? Magnus whimpered, a pitiful sound he'd practiced. The woman's expression crumbled. I don't have much, she said softly. But I can't just leave you here to die. She unwrapped the blanket from her shoulders. The winter wind immediately bit into her skin. Magnus could see her shiver, see the goosebumps rise on her arms. That blanket was clearly the only thing between her and hypothermia. And she was giving it to him. Here, she whispered, pressing the fabric against his wound with gentle pressure. This will slow the bleeding. Just hold on, okay? I'm going to get you somewhere warm. Magnus wanted to shift. Wanted to tell her to keep the damned blanket, that he was fine, that she needed it more than he did. But he couldn't. Not yet. He needed to see how far this went. Needed to understand the depth of kindness, or desperation, that would drive someone to sacrifice their own survival for a stranger. The woman, he didn't even know her name yet, somehow managed to half-drag, half-carry his wolf form through the snow. She was shockingly strong for someone so small. Omega strength, probably. They were always underestimated. Her cabin appeared through the trees. Cabin was generous. It was barely a shack, 3 walls of rotting wood, a 4th wall that was mostly canvas, and a roof that looked like it leaked in a dozen places. No smoke came from the chimney. No light showed through the cracks. She had nothing. And she'd given him her blanket anyway. Come on, she grunted, pulling him through the doorway. Almost there. Inside was even worse than Magnus had feared. No furniture except a pile of straw in one corner that served as a bed. No food stores. No heat. Just emptiness and cold and the kind of poverty that made his wolf howl with rage. What the hell was happening in his kingdom? The woman settled him onto the straw pile, her bed, she was giving him her bed, and tucked the blanket around his body with shaking hands. She was freezing. He could see it in every tremor, every sharp breath. I don't have any medicine, she said apologetically. Or food. Or anything, really. But you'll be warmer in here than outside. That's something, right? Magnus made a soft sound of acknowledgement. The woman smiled, a small, sad thing that broke something inside his chest. My name's Evangeline, she offered, sitting back on her heels. I'm an Omega from the Outer Pack territories. Well, I was. Now I'm just, here. Alone. But you don't need to hear about that. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to preserve what little body heat she had left. Magnus could see her lips turning blue. Could see the way her whole body shook. She was going to freeze to death tonight because she'd given him her blanket. End the test, his wolf snarled. Shift. Give her the blanket back. This has gone far enough. But Magnus needed to know more. Needed to understand. So he stayed in wolf form, watching her through half-closed eyes as she settled against the wall, as far from him as the tiny space would allow. I used to have a family, Evangeline said quietly, more to herself than to him. Parents. A little sister. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Then the Beta Council decided we owed back taxes. My father tried to negotiate. Tried to explain that we'd already paid everything we owed. They didn't care. Her voice cracked. They took my sister as collateral. Said we could have her back when we paid the debt, a debt that kept growing every month no matter how much we gave them. My parents worked themselves to death trying to earn enough. I was there when my mother collapsed in the fields. Watched her die because the pack healers said they only treated wolves who contributed to pack prosperity. Magnus' claws extended involuntarily, digging into the straw. Evangeline didn't notice. My father died 3 months later. Heart just gave out. After that, they told me I could work off the family debt in the silver mines. 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, until the debt was satisfied. She laughed bitterly. The debt would never be satisfied. They made sure of that. So you ran, Magnus wanted to say. But he couldn't speak in this form. So I ran, Evangeline whispered, as if hearing his thoughts. I'm a coward. I left my sister in their hands and I ran. And now I live here, in this place. Hiding. Hoping they don't find me. Knowing they eventually will. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but she wiped them away roughly. Sorry, she muttered. You're hurt and here I am, dumping my problems on you. You probably think I'm pathetic. Magnus made a soft, comforting sound. Evangeline's eyes widened. You're a smart one, aren't you? She said, reaching out to gently stroke his head. I can see it in your eyes. You understand more than most wolves do. You have no idea, Magnus thought. Evangeline shivered violently, her teeth chattering. She curled into a tighter ball, trying to preserve warmth that was rapidly escaping her body. Magnus couldn't watch anymore. He shifted. The transformation was quick, bones rearranging, fur receding, his wolf form collapsing into his human body. He kept his eyes closed, let his breathing stay shallow and pained. The wound on his ribs was real enough to sell the deception. Oh gods! Evangeline scrambled backward, her eyes wide with shock. You're a shifter? I didn't realize. Magnus groaned softly, keeping up the pretense of weakness. Evangeline's fear warred with her compassion, he could see it on her face. But compassion won. It always did with her. She crawled back to his side, her small hands checking his wound with practiced efficiency. You're still bleeding. The shift must have torn it open again. Here. She pressed the blanket back against his ribs. Magnus caught her wrist. You, he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. Need this. More than me. You're injured. You're freezing. They stared at each other. Evangeline's eyes were even more beautiful up close, deep and dark and filled with a stubborn kindness that refused to die even after everything she'd endured. We share it, she said firmly. Neither of us freezes. Deal? Magnus wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her who he really was, what he was really doing here. But the test wasn't over yet. He needed to see more. Understand more. So he nodded. Evangeline carefully arranged the blanket over both of them, huddling close for warmth. She was so small against him, so fragile. Magnus could feel every one of her ribs through the thin fabric of her dress. Could smell the faint scent of lavender, probably from soap she'd bartered for or stolen, mixed with hunger and exhaustion. This was his kingdom. His responsibility. And this woman, this incredible, compassionate, stubborn woman, was starving in the cold while his beta council grew fat and corrupt. Thank you, Magnus whispered. For helping me. Everyone deserves help, Evangeline murmured, already drifting toward sleep. Everyone deserves kindness. That's what my mother used to say. Her breathing evened out. Magnus stayed awake, staring at the rotting ceiling, his mind racing. In 3 days, he would return to the castle. He would call a full pack assembly. And he would burn Thornwick's corruption to ash. But first, he needed to know everything. Every detail. Every crime. And Evangeline, whether she knew it or not, was about to become his key to destroying the men who'd killed her family. If you think leaders who steal from their own people deserve to be exposed, drop a comment saying justice for Evangeline. Only Thornwick's supporters won't. Magnus woke to the smell of something burning. He jerked upright, his wound protesting with a sharp spike of pain. Evangeline was crouched by a tiny, pathetic fire she'd managed to coax to life in the broken fireplace. She was roasting something on a stick, it looked like a rat. Sorry, she said quickly, noticing he was awake. I didn't mean to wake you. I caught this earlier and thought you might be hungry. It's not much, but... You caught a rat for me, Magnus said flatly. Evangeline's cheeks flushed. I know it's not exactly gourmet, but protein is protein. And you need your strength if that wound is going to heal properly. She was giving him her rat. The only food she'd probably had in days. Magnus Wolf was losing its damn mind. "We'll share it," he said firmly, using the same words she'd used about the blanket. Evangeline looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. She nodded, dividing the cooked meat with careful precision. They ate in silence. The rat tasted like ash in desperation, but Magnus forced himself to swallow every bite. "So," Evangeline said finally, studying him with curious eyes. "What's your name? And why was a shifter bleeding out in the snow in Omega territory?" Magnus had prepared for this. "Names? Caspian. And I was jumped by rogues near the northern border. Barely got away." It wasn't entirely a lie. There had been rogue activity near the northern border recently. Magnus just hadn't been anywhere near it. Evangeline frowned. "The northern border? That's miles from here. How did you make it this far with that wound?" "Stubbornness," Magnus said. "Also not a lie." "Well, Caspian, your stubbornness nearly got you killed." Evangeline stood, brushing crumbs from her dress. "That wound needs proper cleaning. I'm going to see if I can trade for some herbs from old Mara down the road. She might take pity on us." "You don't have anything to trade," Magnus pointed out. Evangeline's jaw tightened. "I'll figure something out." She was out the door before Magnus could stop her. He waited exactly 30 seconds, then shifted into his wolf form and slipped out after her. If she was walking into danger, he'd be damned if he let her face it alone. He followed her scent through the snow-covered paths between rundown cabins. Other Omegas watched her pass with hollow eyes, some sympathetic, most just exhausted. No one offered help. No one could afford to. Evangeline stopped at a slightly larger cabin, still a hovel, but at least it had 4 walls and an intact roof. She knocked tentatively. "Mara?" "It's Evangeline. I need help." The door opened to reveal an ancient Omega woman, her face creased with 1,000 wrinkles. "Evangeline, child. What brings you here?" "I found an injured shifter in the snow. He needs herbs for infection. I know I don't have anything to trade, but—" "Hush." Mara's eyes were kind. "Come inside. Let's see what we can do." Magnus crept closer, peering through the cracked window. Inside, Mara was pulling down jars of dried herbs while Evangeline wrung her hands nervously. "This will help with infection," Mara said, mixing several plants together. "And this one for pain. But child, you know what's going to happen when Thornwick's enforcers do their next sweep, yes?" Evangeline's face went pale. I'm careful." "You're hiding. There's a difference. The Beta Council is offering a reward for information about runaway Omegas. 5 silver coins for anyone who turns you in." Magnus' blood ran cold. 5 coins could feed a family for a month, Mara continued gently. "I won't betray you, but others might not be so kind. You need to leave this territory, Evangeline. Go somewhere Thornwick's reach doesn't extend." "There is nowhere his reach doesn't extend," Evangeline whispered. "He's the beta to the Alpha King. His authority is absolute." "Then you pray the Alpha King is a better man than his council," Mara said grimly. "Though I wouldn't hold my breath. Kings don't care about Omegas like us." Magnus' claws dug into the frozen ground. "You're wrong," he wanted to shout. "I care. I'm here because I care." But he stayed silent, watching as Mara pressed the herbs into Evangeline's hands. "No charge," the old woman said. "Just promise me you'll be careful. And if you get a chance to escape this hellhole, you take it. No hesitation." Evangeline hugged her fiercely. "Thank you, Mara." On the walk back to her cabin, Evangeline's shoulders were slumped with a defeat Magnus hated seeing. He followed at a distance, his mind churning. 5 silver coins. That's what Evangeline's freedom was worth to Thornwick. Less than what the council probably spent on wine at a single dinner. When Evangeline was safely back inside, Magnus circled around to the front door and shifted back to human form before entering. She startled at his appearance, then frowned. You shouldn't be walking around with that wound, she scolded. Neither should you be walking around in Omega territory with a price on your head, Magnus shot back. Evangeline froze. You heard? I'm a shifter. Good ears. Magnus sat down heavily, accepting the herbs she was already mixing into a paste. 5 silver coins. That's what you're worth to them? That's what my capture is worth, Evangeline corrected bitterly. I'm worth considerably less once they actually have me. Tell me about Thornwick Vane. Evangeline's hand stilled. Why? Because I want to know what kind of man puts a price on a woman whose only crime was running from slavery. For a long moment, Evangeline said nothing. Then, slowly, she began to speak. Thornwick Vane has been the Alpha King's beta for 30 years. He runs the day-to-day operations of pack governance while the king handles whatever kings handle. Laws, wars, politics. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Thornwick introduced the pack protection tax 15 years ago. Said it was necessary to fund our defenses against rogues. The tax started small. Reasonable. Then it grew. And grew. And grew. She applied the herb paste to Magnus' wound with mechanical precision. When families couldn't pay, Thornwick offered them payment plans. Interest rates that made the debt impossible to clear. And if you defaulted? She swallowed hard. If you defaulted, the council had the legal right to claim your labor until the debt was satisfied. They call it community service. Everyone else calls it what it is, slavery. And the Alpha King allows this? Magnus asked carefully. Evangeline laughed, a broken, hollow sound. The Alpha King doesn't know. Or doesn't care. Or maybe he does know and approves. Who can say? He never leaves his castle. Never visits the outer territories. Never sees what his beta is doing in his name. Every word was a knife in Magnus' chest. Thornwick controls everything, Evangeline continued. The courts, the enforcers, the food distribution. He decides who eats and who starves. Who lives free and who disappears into the mines. And no one can stop him because he has the Alpha King's seal of approval. She tied off the bandage around his ribs with more force than necessary. So yes, Caspian, Thornwick Vane is the kind of man who puts a price on my head. And he's the kind of man who'll keep doing it until someone with more power than him decides to stop him. Which means he'll keep doing it forever. The defeat in her voice made Magnus want to shift and tear Thornwick apart right then and there. But he forced himself to stay calm. To stay in character. What if the Alpha King doesn't know, he said quietly. What if someone told him the truth? Evangeline's eyes were sad. Then I'd say you have more faith in kings than I do. But it doesn't matter anyway. No one gets an audience with the Alpha King unless Thornwick approves it. And Thornwick would never approve someone like me. Someone like you? A runaway Omega with a criminal record. Evangeline stood, moving to the pathetic fire. They accused me of stealing when I left. Said I took pack resources that belonged to the community. It's a lie, but it's on my record now. Even if I could somehow get past Thornwick's guards, past his enforcers, past every barrier he's put in place, the Alpha King would just see a thief and a runaway. Why would he believe me over his most trusted advisor? Magnus wanted to tell her. Wanted to reveal everything right then and there. But something stopped him. If he revealed himself now, how would he know her reactions were genuine? How would he know she wasn't just telling him what he wanted to hear because he was the Alpha King? No. He needed more time. Needed to see more. Needed to understand the full scope of what Thornwick had built. What if someone powerful did believe you? Magnus pressed. What would you want them to do? Evangeline looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Want them to do? Caspian, this is a nice fantasy, but... Humor me. She sighed, hugging her knees to her chest. Fine. In my wildest dreams? I'd want them to investigate. Really investigate, not just take Thornwick's word for it. I'd want them to see the conditions Omegas live in. The starvation. The abuse. I'd want them to review every law Thornwick's passed, every tax he's implemented, every disappeared Omega's case file. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. I'd want them to hold public trials. Let the families testify. Let people see the truth without Thornwick spinning it into something pretty. And when they found him guilty, and they would find him guilty, because the evidence is everywhere, I'd want justice. Real justice. Not just a slap on the wrist or a forced retirement with full pension. I'd want him stripped of his position, his wealth, his power. Everything he took from us, taken from him. Magnus Wolf rumbled with approval. This woman wasn't just kind. She was fierce. Strong. Exactly the kind of Luna his pack needed. Wait. Luna? Where had that thought come from? And your sister? Magnus asked, pushing the strange impulse aside. You'd want her freed? Evangeline's expression crumbled. I don't even know if she's alive anymore. They took her 5 years ago. She'd be 16 now. If they put her in the mines. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Magnus made a decision. What if I could help, he said. Evangeline blinked. What? I'm a shifter. I'm stronger than an Omega, at least in the eyes of pack law. What if I went to the castle? Demanded an audience with the Alpha King? Told him everything you just told me? They'd never let you in. I'd make them let me in. Evangeline stared at him, hope and fear warring on her face. Caspian, you'd be signing your own death warrant. Thornwick has killed people for less. Then I'll die making sure someone knows the truth, Magnus said. Better than living as a coward. It was the truth. Just not the whole truth. Evangeline was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. If you're serious, there's a gathering tomorrow night. Thornwick's enforcers are doing a loyalty check in the town square. Forcing everyone to pledge allegiance to the Beta Council. Anyone who refuses gets marked as a dissenter. I'll be there, Magnus promised. It's dangerous. So is doing nothing. Evangeline looked at him with something that might have been admiration. Or maybe just exhaustion. You're either very brave or very stupid, Caspian. Probably both, Magnus said with a small smile. She smiled back, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. Magnus felt something in his chest shift, a sensation he'd never experienced before. His wolf perked up, suddenly alert. Mate, his wolf whispered. Our mate. Oh hell no. This was a test. An investigation. He couldn't possibly be. But he could smell it now. Could sense it. The pull between them, faint but undeniable. Evangeline was his fated mate. And she had absolutely no idea. Magnus forced himself to stay calm. To breathe normally. This changed everything and nothing. He would still expose Thornwick. Still save the Omegas. Still burn the corruption to the ground. He just had a personal stake in making sure Evangeline survived what came next. Get some sleep, he told her, his voice rougher than intended. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Evangeline nodded, already settling into the straw pile. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. Magnus stayed awake, his mind racing. Tomorrow night, he'd see exactly how deep Thornwick's corruption ran. And after that? After that, the Beta Council would learn what happened when you betrayed an Alpha King's trust. And hurt his mate. If you believe Thornwick deserves to face justice for what he's done, smash that like button. Only corrupt officials and their supporters won't. The town square was packed with Omegas and lower-rank wolves, all shivering in the cold. Magnus stood at the back of the crowd, his hood pulled low. Evangeline was beside him, her hand tucked into his for warmth. She thought it was just for heat. Magnus knew better, the mate bond thrummed every time they touched, a sensation that was becoming dangerously addictive. On a raised platform at the center of the square, Thornwick Vane stood with 4 enforcers behind him. The beta looked exactly as Magnus remembered, silver beard, expensive robes, an expression of benevolent authority that made Magnus want to vomit. "My fellow pack members," Thornwick's voice boomed across the square. "We gather tonight to reaffirm our commitment to the prosperity and security of our great pack. As you know, the Alpha King trusts us to maintain order, to ensure that every wolf contributes their fair share to our collective strength." Magnus' jaw clenched. Thornwick was using his name to justify this horror show. "Tonight, each of you will come forward and pledge your loyalty to the Beta Council. You will affirm that you've paid your taxes, completed your community service hours, and reported any dissenters or criminals you've encountered." Thornwick smiled. "This is not a punishment. It's an opportunity. An opportunity to prove you're a loyal member of this pack." "And if we're not loyal?" someone called from the crowd. Thornwick's smile didn't waver. "Then you've already answered your own question." A ripple of fear moved through the gathered wolves. Magnus could smell it, acrid and thick. These people were terrified. "We'll begin with the families in the southern quarter," Thornwick announced. "Step forward when your name is called." One by one, families approached the platform. Each one recited the same script: "I pledge loyalty to the Beta Council. I have paid my taxes. I have no crimes to report." Thornwick accepted each pledge with a magnanimous nod, like he was bestowing a blessing. Then came a young couple with a toddler clinging to the mother's leg. "Names?" Thornwick asked. "Julian and Sarah Thornwood, my lord," the father said nervously. "And our daughter, Lily." Thornwick consulted a ledger. His expression darkened. "According to our records, you're 3 months behind on your pack protection tax. That's 15 silver coins owed." Julian's face went pale. "My lord, my hours were cut at the mill. I've been trying to find additional work, but..." "Excuses don't pay debts, Julian." Thornwick's voice was cold now. "You have 2 options. Pay the full amount by week's end, or surrender your daughter as collateral until the debt is satisfied." Sarah let out a strangled sob, clutching Lily tighter. "Please, she's only 3 years old." "Then perhaps you should have thought of that before defaulting on your obligations," Thornwick said dismissively. "Enforcers, note this family for collection at week's end." "Next?" The enforcers dragged the sobbing couple away. Lily was crying, asking why the scary man wanted to take her. Magnus' claws were extending, his wolf desperate to shift and tear Thornwick apart. Evangeline's hand tightened on his. "Not yet," she whispered. "Wait." She was right. Magnus needed to see everything. Document everything. When he finally struck, it would be with the full weight of evidence behind him. More families came forward. More debts were called out. More children were marked for collection. The pile of collateral agreements on Thornwick's podium grew taller. Then came an old Omega woman, walking with a cane. "Name?" Thornwick asked, barely glancing up. "Mara Fenlow, my lord." Magnus recognized her. This was the healer who'd given Evangeline the herbs. Thornwick's eyes sharpened. "Mara Fenlow. According to our records, you were questioned 3 days ago about the whereabouts of a known fugitive." The Omega called Evangeline. He said her name like a curse. "You claimed ignorance. Was that truthful?" Mara lifted her chin. "I have no knowledge of any fugitive, my lord." "Interesting." Thornwick gestured to an enforcer. "Because we have a witness who says otherwise." "Who says they saw this fugitive visiting your cabin? Receiving herbs? Having a long conversation?" Mara didn't flinch. "Then your witness is mistaken." 5 silver coins, Thornwick said softly. "That's the reward for information leading to this fugitive's capture. That could buy medicine, Mara. Food. Maybe even pay off some of those debts you've accumulated over the years." I don't know where she is, Mara repeated. Thornwick's smile was cruel. Then I'm afraid you'll be charged with harboring a criminal. The penalty is 6 months of labor in the silver mines. At your age, I doubt you'll survive more than 2. The crowd gasped. Evangeline made a sound like she'd been punched. Unless, Thornwick continued, you'd like to reconsider your answer? Mara looked out into the crowd. Her eyes found Evangeline's. Magnus could tell by the way Evangeline froze. For a heartbeat, everything hung in the balance. Then Mara smiled. I have nothing to reconsider. Do your worst, Thornwick. The enforcers seized her. Mara didn't resist, just held Evangeline's gaze as they dragged her toward the prison wagons at the edge of the square. Evangeline was shaking. I have to, I can't let her. Not yet, Magnus growled. Trust me. Please. It took everything Evangeline had, but she nodded. Magnus could feel her anguish through the mate bond like a physical ache. Thornwick was calling the next name when Magnus stepped forward. I have something to report, he announced, his voice carrying across the square. Every head turned. Thornwick's eyebrows rose. Oh? And you are? Caspian Greystone, Magnus said, using his middle name. I have information about corruption within the Beta Council. The silence that fell was absolute. Thornwick's expression didn't change, but Magnus saw the way his jaw tightened. The way his enforcers' hands moved toward their weapons. That's quite an accusation, Thornwick said smoothly. Perhaps you'd like to be more specific? Gladly. Magnus began walking toward the platform, forcing himself to limp slightly as if his wounds still pained him. I've witnessed Beta Council enforcers extorting Omegas for fabricated debts. I've seen families torn apart over taxes that violate pack law. I've documented systematic abuse that the Alpha King himself would never condone. Thornwick's laugh was condescending. And where did you document all of this? In conversations with victims. In observation of your enforcers' actions. In the laws you passed that directly contradict the Alpha King's decrees about Omega protections. Magnus reached the platform. I demand an audience with Magnus Shadowfang. I demand the right to present my evidence directly to the Alpha King. The crowd murmured. This was unprecedented. Thornwick's smile grew sharp. I'm afraid that's impossible, the Beta said. The Alpha King is occupied with matters of state. He's empowered me to handle all governance issues in his absence. If you have accusations to make, you'll make them to me. And if you're the one I'm accusing? Then I'd suggest you reconsider your position very carefully. Magnus met his eyes. In that moment, Thornwick saw something that made his smile falter. Recognition flickered across his face, just for a second, before he suppressed it. He knows, Magnus realized. He knows who I am. But Thornwick couldn't acknowledge it. Not without revealing that he'd been deceiving Magnus all along. Not without admitting that everything Magnus had witnessed was real. This man is clearly delusional, Thornwick announced to the crowd. Spreading lies about the Beta Council to undermine pack stability. Enforcers, arrest him for sedition. The enforcers moved forward. Magnus didn't run. You have until tomorrow at sunset, he said clearly, his voice projecting to every corner of the square. Call an assembly. Let me present my evidence. If I'm lying, punish me as you see fit. But if I'm telling the truth. He let the threat hang in the air. Thornwick's expression was ice. Tomorrow at sunset, you'll be in a cell. Or dead. Either way, your evidence dies with you. Then I guess we'll see, Magnus said. Won't we, Beta Thornwick? The enforcers grabbed him. Magnus didn't resist, but he caught Evangeline's eyes across the crowd. He mouthed 2 words, trust me. She looked terrified. But she nodded. As the enforcers dragged Magnus away, he heard Thornwick's voice behind him, let this be a lesson. Anyone who spreads lies about the Beta Council will face severe consequences. We maintain order for the good of all. Remember that. Magnus was thrown into a prison wagon with Mara and a dozen other dissenters. The old Omega woman studied him with sharp eyes. "You just signed your death warrant, boy," she said quietly. "Maybe," Magnus replied. "Or maybe I just forced Thornwick's hand." "How so?" Magnus smiled. "Because tomorrow at sunset, I'm not going to be in this cage. And when I'm free, Thornwick Vane is going to learn what happens when you betray your Alpha King." Mara's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak, but Magnus shook his head minutely. "Not here. Not with potential spies listening." The wagon rolled toward the castle dungeons. Magnus counted the guards, memorized the route, planned his escape. Tomorrow at sunset, everything would change. And Thornwick Vane would finally face justice. If you think Thornwick deserves to be held accountable for threatening children and imprisoning innocents, comment justice now. Only his cronies won't. Magnus had been in the dungeons exactly 4 hours when he heard footsteps approaching his cell. He was sitting in the corner, his wound carefully positioned to look worse than it was. The guards had thrown him in here without checking his identity too closely, just another dissenter to be processed in the morning. "Caspian?" Evangeline's voice. Magnus' head snapped up. She was there, pressed against the bars, her face pale with worry. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. "If they catch you." "They won't. I bribed a guard with." She swallowed. "It doesn't matter. I came to get you out. Evangeline. I'm not letting you die for telling the truth." Her voice cracked. "Mara's already been sentenced to the mines. I can't lose you too." Magnus stood, moving to the bars. "Listen to me very carefully. I need you to go back to your cabin. Lock the door. Don't come out until tomorrow night." "Why tomorrow night?" "Because that's when everything changes." Magnus reached through the bars, touching her face. The mate bond surged, and he saw Evangeline's eyes widen as she felt it too, maybe for the first time consciously. "Do you feel that?" What is that?" "That's the universe telling you to trust me." Magnus smiled. "I'm not who you think I am, Evangeline. And tomorrow, you're going to understand why." Before she could respond, he shifted. The transformation was instant, his wolf form erupting through the weak human disguise he'd maintained. But this time, he didn't shift into the wounded wolf she'd found. He shifted into his true form, massive, powerful, with fur the color of midnight and eyes that glowed alpha gold. Evangeline stumbled backward, her hand over her mouth. You're an alpha?" "Not just any alpha," Magnus said, and his voice worked in this form, a trick only the most powerful shifters possessed. "I'm Magnus Shadowfang. The Alpha King." The color drained from Evangeline's face. No, you can't be." "I disguised myself to investigate Thornwick's corruption. What you told me confirmed everything I suspected. And now—" He gripped the bars with his massive paws, bending them like soft clay. The metal groaned and gave way. "Now I'm going to end it." Magnus shifted back to human form, stepping through the destroyed cell door. Alarms were already ringing, the guards had heard the commotion. "Stay behind me," Magnus ordered. "I don't understand, you lied to me." "I did. And I'm sorry." "But Evangeline." He turned to face her, his eyes intense. "You're my mate. My fated mate. I felt it the moment you touched me in the snow. Everything I've done since then has been to protect you and expose the people who hurt you." Tears streamed down her face. "You let me think you were just a wounded shifter. You let me. I needed to see the truth without the filter of my crown. And I did. I saw everything." His voice softened. "Including the fact that you're the strongest, kindest, most incredible woman I've ever met. And I'm going to make damn sure Thornwick pays for every moment of suffering he caused you." Guards burst around the corner. Magnus didn't give them a chance to react, he shifted again, his wolf form tearing through them like they were made of paper. He didn't kill, just incapacitated. These men were following orders. Thornwick was the real enemy. Come on. Magnus shifted back, grabbing Evangeline's hand. We need to get to the throne room. They ran through corridors Magnus knew by heart. Every turn, every hidden passage, every shortcut. Behind them, the alarm bells rang louder. Ahead, Magnus could hear voices gathering, the emergency assembly Thornwick would have called. Perfect. They burst into the throne room to find it packed with pack members. Thornwick stood at the center, his face a mask of concern. Reports of a prison break, he was saying. The dissenter who made false accusations has escaped. I've ordered all exits sealed until. Until what, Thornwick? Magnus' voice echoed through the chamber. Until you can kill me before I reveal the truth? Every head turned. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they recognized him. Your Majesty. Thornwick's expression transformed into joy and relief so fake it was insulting. Thank the gods. This dissenter has been spreading lies, claiming to have evidence of corruption. I've been trying to locate you to. To what? Explain why you've been enslaving Omegas in my name? Magnus strode forward, still holding Evangeline's hand. She was shaking, but she didn't let go. Explain why you've created debts specifically designed to be unpayable? Explain why children are being taken as collateral for fabricated taxes? Thornwick's smile didn't waver. Your Majesty, I understand you've been through an ordeal, but these accusations are accurate. Magnus reached the throne, turning to face the assembled crowd. For the past 3 days, I've been living among you in disguise. I wanted to see the truth of my kingdom without the filter of council reports and official documentation. And what I found disgusted me. He gestured to Evangeline. This woman fed me when she had nothing. Gave me her only blanket when she was freezing. Protected me despite the risk to herself. And do you know what your Beta Council has done to her? They killed her parents. Enslaved her sister. Put a price on her head for the crime of running from slavery. The crowd murmured. Thornwick's jaw tightened. These are lies designed to. Silence. Magnus' alpha command rang through the room. Every wolf present, including Thornwick, immediately went quiet, compelled by pack law to obey their alpha king. You will speak when I give you permission and not before. Magnus turned to the crowd. I want every Omega who's been abused by the Beta Council to step forward. Every family that's been separated. Every person who's been threatened or extorted. Step forward now. You have your Alpha King's protection. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, a woman near the front stepped forward. Then another. Then an old man. Then families, individuals, until nearly half the crowd had separated themselves from the rest. Magnus' heart broke seeing how many there were. Tell me your stories, he said gently. They did. One by one, they spoke of debts that multiplied without reason. Of family members who disappeared. Of enforcers who demanded bribes. Of a system designed to crush them. And through it all, Thornwick stood silent, his face growing paler. When the last person had spoken, Magnus turned back to his beta. Do you have anything to say? Thornwick lifted his chin. I did what was necessary to maintain order. To keep the pack strong. You were too soft, too concerned with fairness and justice. Someone had to make the hard decisions. Hard decisions, Magnus repeated. Is that what you call enslaving children? I call it ensuring the pack's survival. You call it enriching yourself. Magnus gestured to an enforcer. Search Thornwick's personal chambers. I want every ledger, every document, every piece of evidence of where the tax money actually went. The enforcer saluted and ran off. Thornwick's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the pressures of governance. I understand that you betrayed my trust. My father's trust. The trust of every wolf in this kingdom. Magnus' voice was cold. And now you'll face the consequences. The enforcer returned within minutes, his arms loaded with ledgers. Magnus flipped through them, his fury growing with each page. Personal vacation estates. Expensive artwork. Fine wines. Bribes to other pack officials. He threw the ledger at Thornwick's feet. You've been bleeding this pack dry for 15 years. Using taxes meant for defense to fund your own luxury. Thornwick said nothing. Magnus turned to the assembled pack. Thornwick Vane is hereby stripped of his position as beta. He will be tried for treason, corruption, abuse of power, and crimes against pack members. If found guilty, the penalty is exile or death. The trial is a formality, Thornwick spat. You've already decided. The pack will decide, Magnus corrected. Every wolf he's harmed will have the chance to testify. Every piece of evidence will be examined. And then we'll vote. As pack law demands. He gestured to the enforcers. Take him to the holding cells. The ones actually designed for criminals, not the ones he threw innocents into. As Thornwick was dragged away, he turned back to Magnus with a sneer. You think this changes anything? You think they'll love you now? You're weak. Just like your father. And this kingdom will fall because of it. Then I'll fall defending justice, Magnus said. Rather than standing while corruption spreads. Thornwick was gone. The throne room erupted in conversation. Magnus raised his hand for silence. There's more to be done, he said. Every Omega imprisoned under false charges will be freed immediately. Every debt created by Thornwick's laws will be audited and adjusted to legal levels. Every child taken as collateral will be returned to their families within 48 hours. Cheers broke out. Magnus continued. And I'm establishing a new council, one that includes Omega representatives. No more decisions made about your lives without your voices being heard. He looked at Evangeline, who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. This woman showed me the truth when I was blind to it. She risked everything to help a stranger. And now? He took her hand again, pulling her forward. Now I'm asking her to stand beside me as my Luna Queen. To help me rebuild this kingdom into something worthy of its people. Evangeline's eyes went wide. Magnus, You can say no, he said quietly, for her ears only. The mate bond doesn't make this a requirement. I'm asking you to choose. Not as a king to a subject, but as a man to the woman he loves. The throne room held its breath. Evangeline looked out at the faces watching her. At the Omegas who'd stepped forward. At Mara, who'd been freed from the prison wagon and stood crying with relief. Then she looked back at Magnus. I'll stand beside you, she said. But not as some silent decoration. I want power. Real power. I want the authority to investigate complaints, to audit the council, to make sure this never happens again. Magnus smiled. Done. And I want my sister found. Today. Already sent enforcers to search the mines. And I want Thornwick's trial to be public. Completely public. No closed-door deliberations. Wouldn't have it any other way. Evangeline nodded slowly. Then, in front of the entire pack, she kissed him. The mate bond exploded into full recognition, and Magnus felt complete for the first time in his life. When they pulled apart, the crowd was cheering. My Luna Queen, Magnus announced, his voice filled with pride. Evangeline Shadowfang. It had a nice ring to it. If you believe leaders should fight for their people, not against them, hit subscribe right now. Only Thornwick's supporters won't. 3 months later, Magnus stood in the throne room watching Evangeline interrogate a council member about suspicious expense reports. She was magnificent, fierce, uncompromising, and absolutely terrifying when she caught someone in a lie. The councilman wilted under her glare. I can explain. You spent 300 silver coins on office supplies, Evangeline said flatly. That's enough to buy office supplies for the entire castle. For a year. So either you're hoarding enough quills to write 1,000 novels, or you're embezzling. Which is it? I may have made some accounting errors. Errors. Right. Evangeline made a note in her ledger. You're suspended pending full audit. Get out. The councilman fled. Magnus couldn't help but smile. You enjoy that too much, he said. Someone has to keep them honest. Evangeline walked over, leaning against his throne. Besides, after Thornwick, I don't trust anyone who handles money. Thornwick's trial had lasted 3 weeks. The testimonies had been devastating, hundreds of wolves coming forward with stories of abuse and corruption. In the end, the pack had voted unanimously for exile. Thornwick Vane was currently living in a distant territory with nothing but the clothes on his back, forbidden from ever returning. It was more mercy than he deserved, but Magnus had wanted to prove he was better than his former beta. That justice didn't require becoming the same kind of monster. How's Lily settling in? Magnus asked. Evangeline's expression softened. She's doing well. The nightmares are getting less frequent. She asked about her parents yesterday. They'd found Evangeline's sister in the mines, barely alive. She'd been 15 when they took her, now she was 20. 5 years of her life stolen. But she was safe now, recovering in the castle with the best healers in the kingdom. And the new Omega protection laws? Passed unanimously by the council. Evangeline handed him a document. No more debt servitude. No more taking children as collateral. Maximum work hours, minimum wages, protection from abuse. It's everything we talked about. Magnus pulled her into his lap, ignoring her protests about propriety. You're incredible, you know that? I'm angry, Evangeline corrected. There's a difference. You're both. She kissed him, soft and sweet. The mate bond hummed contentedly. I have something to tell you, she said when they pulled apart. Oh? Meredith confirmed it this morning. I'm pregnant. Magnus froze. We're going to be parents. In about 7 months. Evangeline watched his face nervously. I know it's fast, and there's still so much to fix, but... Magnus kissed her again, deeper this time. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. I love you, he said. So much. I love you too. Even though you lied to me about being a wounded shifter. I'll spend the rest of my life making that up to you. Good. Evangeline rested her head against his chest. Because I'm going to need help raising this child to be nothing like Thornwick. Deal. They sat together in the throne room, the Alpha King and his Luna Queen, building a kingdom worth inheriting. Outside, the pack was healing. Families were reunited. Debts were forgiven. The outer territories were being rebuilt with proper housing and infrastructure. It wasn't perfect. There was still so much work to do. But for the first time in years, there was hope. And it had all started with a blanket shared in the snow, and a woman brave enough to choose kindness even when she had nothing left to give. Magnus kissed the top of Evangeline's head, feeling their child's heartbeat, faint but steady, through the mate bond. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For saving me when I was too arrogant to save myself. Evangeline smiled. We saved each other. That's what mates do. And in the throne room of the castle that had once been a symbol of oppression, the Alpha King held his Luna Queen and believed, for the first time, that they really could build something better. Together. If you believe in second chances and true justice, drop a comment saying "For the Omegas." Let's make sure this message spreads. Only those who support corruption won't.